Accra had been dying for 11 years, and almost nobody had bothered to watch. The star sat at the center of the system like an old furnace with a cracked door. It was swollen and orange, and it threw off flares without warning. Sheets of radiation that could cook a ship's electronics from 100 million kilometers away. The charts marked the whole system in red. Insurance companies wouldn't cover a hull that went inside the outer marker. Most captains gave it a wide berth and didn't think about it again. The only people who came to Accra anymore were the ones who made their living off other people's disasters. Captain Miriam Alcott was one of those people, and she had made peace with it a long time ago. She was 44 years old, with gray coming in at her temples and a permanent squint from 18 years of staring at cutting torches. She ran a salvage tug called the Mudlark, a squat, ugly ship with a reinforced nose and two enormous grappling arms that made it look like a beetle carrying something it shouldn't. 9 people crewed her. They had been out for 5 months. "Anything?" Miriam asked. Dev Ramanathan didn't look up from his console. He was 38, the ship's engineer, and he had the kind of calm that came from being genuinely good at a job that could kill you. Or a freighter, assembly registry, gutted about 6 years ago, but they left the coil housing. That's worth the trip on its own. Then we take it, already tagged it. The boneyards of Accra were full of ships like that. When the assembly had declared the system unsafe, it had pulled out its people and its money and left everything else behind. Hulls drifted in slow, tumbling orbits. Some of them still had their running lights on, blinking away in the dark for nobody. Miriam had been working these fields for 2 years, and it still bothered her. The lights, it felt like walking through a graveyard where somebody had forgotten to blow out the candles. Captain Nia Kowalski's voice came from the comm station. She was 27, the youngest aboard, and she had a habit of saying things very quietly when they were very important. "I've got a carrier signal from the freighter." "No, ma'am," from inside the inner belt. Miriam turned around. "Nothing's inside the inner belt?" "Something is." Nia's fingers moved across the panel. "It's weak. It's bouncing off the dust and coming apart, but it's repeating. It's a distress loop." Toby Grange, the first mate, put down his coffee. He was 51, built like a door, and he had spent 19 years in the merchant service before he decided he liked salvage better. He was the most careful man on the ship. "Automated?" "No," Nia swallowed. "It's live. Somebody's reading it out." "Put it on," the bridge speakers hissed. For a few seconds there was nothing but static and the low grinding sound the star made across every frequency in the system. Then a voice came through, thin and flat and exhausted, running through the same words over and over the way a person does when they have said something 10,000 times and stopped expecting it to work. The translator caught about half of it. "Austral station, remaining population, 9,400, life support at 41%. We are not rated. We are not rated. We have no transit priority. Anyone, please." The signal broke. It came back. It said the same thing again. "Nobody on the bridge moved." "Austral," Toby said slowly. "That's a refinery station. Rhine crude. I thought they evacuated it." They did. Dev had already pulled the record up. His face had gone strange. "Assembly closure order 44 8 days ago. Evacuation completed and logged." He looked up. 2,600 personnel removed. Miriam did the arithmetic in her head, and it was very simple arithmetic, and she hated it immediately. "There were 12,000 people on that station," she said. "Yes. So they took 2,600. "Yes. And logged it as completed." Dev didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. Sam Byrne had come up from the shop deck without anybody noticing, the way he always did. He was 61 years old, a welder, the oldest man aboard by 15 years, and he had hands like something carved out of a fence post. He stood in the hatchway with a rag in one fist and listened to the loop cycle through a third time. "They left the ones who didn't score," he said. "Sam, that's what rated means, Captain. You know it does?" He wiped his hands. "They took the ones with certifications and berths waiting for them somewhere else. Everybody else stayed to keep the reactors from going critical on the way out." He shrugged, and the shrug was the worst part. "It's not new. They just don't usually leave the radio on." Miriam turned to Nia. "How long until the star flares?" "I'd have to ask the buoy." "Ask it." The assembly navigation buoy was a dumb, arrogant piece of machinery parked at the system's outer marker, and it answered in about 90 seconds. Nia read it off the screen with her voice getting smaller as she went. "Predicted class, 9 event in 59 hours, 16 minutes plus or minus 4 hours. She paused. "And there's a rider on the message. Read it. Accra system is under closure order 44. All transit inside the inner marker is prohibited. Vessels entering forfeit salvage rights, insurance standing, and assembly gate priority. This closure is final and is not subject to appeal." The bridge was quiet. Toby spoke first because somebody had to be the person who said the sensible thing out loud. Captain, we're a tug. We hold 40 people in a bad emergency, maybe 200 if we tore out everything that isn't a wall and let them stand up the whole way. I know what we hold. 9,400, Toby said. That's not a rescue, that's a lottery. We'd fill up in 3 hours and then we'd have to close the door on 8,000 people who watched us do it. I know that too. Then say what you're thinking, because I don't like watching you get there slow. Miriam looked out the forward port. Accra hung there, huge and orange and patient, and somewhere behind all that dust a station full of people was reading a message into a dead channel because it was the only thing left to do with their hands. I'm thinking that in 59 hours nobody is going to be able to say they didn't know, she said. The buoy's got a log. That message has been going out for 8 days on an open band. Every ship in 4 systems has had a chance to hear it. She turned around. Somebody heard it, Toby. Somebody with a lot more room than us heard it and did the same math you just did and kept going. That's not a plan. No, she agreed. The plan is we go in and we start moving people, and then we make it everybody else's problem. Dev laughed once, without any humor in it. That's not a plan either, Captain. It's closer. Miriam sat down in her chair and pulled the harness across her chest. Mr. Grange, plot us inside the inner marker. Dev, I want the cargo bay purged and pressurized by the time we dock. Dump the coil housing. Dump all of it. I don't care what it's worth. Nia, ma'am. Tell them we're coming. Nia's hands hovered over the board. The closure order says. I know what it says. Miriam's voice was very flat. Tell them we're coming. Austral Station had been beautiful once, in an industrial sort of way. It was a refinery ring 3 kilometers across, built to catch raw metal fired up from the moons below and spin it into ingots for half the sector. 50 years of that work had left it stained and pitted, but it had held together because the people who lived on it had spent their whole lives keeping it that way. Now half the ring was dark. The Mudlark came in, slow along the spine, running her lights across the hull, and every window Miriam passed had faces in it. Docking clamps in 60 seconds, Toby said. Captain, their outer ring is venting in 4 places. They've sealed it off with plate steel and foam. I've never seen anybody do that. That's not a repair. That's a bet. They're welders and refiners, Sam said over the intercom from the shop deck. Give me a station full of welders and 8 days and I'll hold a hole shut with my teeth. The airlock cycled. Miriam went down to meet them herself, with Dr. Yusuf Haddad beside her and nobody else, because she'd decided that 9,000 frightened people did not need to see an armed reception. The Rin were shorter than she expected. Most of them came up to her shoulder. Their skin was a dusty gold, dry-looking, and it creased around their eyes and mouths in a way that made even the young ones look thoughtful. They had wide, flat eyes with a second lid that flicked sideways when they blinked. Their hands had 4 fingers, thick and strong. Their ears were folded leather flaps, set low on the skull, and when they were frightened, the ears pressed flat. Every single ear in that corridor was pressed flat. One of them stepped forward. She wore a work harness covered in tool loops, and there was a burn scar across the left side of her face that had healed badly. I'm Cepha, she said. The translator gave her a low, careful voice. Third shift foreman. I am... She stopped and started again. There is no station director anymore. The station director was raided, so it is me, Miriam Alcott, captain of the Mudlark. Miriam put her hand out, then thought better of it, then put it out again. I don't know if you people do this. Sifa looked at the hand for a moment, then she took it in both of hers, very carefully, like it was something that might break. You came inside the marker, she said. We did. Your ship will be delisted. You will lose your gate priority. You understand this? We understand it. Sifa's ears came up very slightly. How many can you take? And there it was. Miriam had rehearsed the answer 9 different ways on the trip in, and every one of them had sounded like a coward. So in the end, she just said it. 200. If we cut out the bunks and the water tanks and everyone stands. The corridor was full of people. She watched the number travel down it. She watched it reach the back, where a woman was holding a child against her hip, and she watched the woman's face do absolutely nothing at all, because the woman had already known. 200, Cepha repeated. I'm not here to take 200, Miriam said. I'm here to get your gate open. Show me the throat. The transit gate at Austral was a 100-meter ring mounted on the station's outer arm, and it had been dead for 8 days. They did not break it, said Vesic. Vesic was the station's senior gate engineer. He was old, older than Cepha, with a milky film across one eye and a way of standing with his weight on one leg, and he had the specific bone-deep irritation of a man watching amateurs touch his machine. They did not have to break it, he went on. The ring is fine, the coils are fine. The assembly does not put the lock in the machine, they put the lock in the handshake. He tapped the console. Every gate asks Meridian for permission before it opens. Meridian says yes, or Meridian says nothing. 8 days ago, Meridian started saying nothing. Dev leaned over his shoulder. So we spoof the handshake. Yes, Vesic gave him a look. I have been spoofing the handshake for 6 days. Human, it is not the handshake that is the problem. Then what is? Vesic brought up a schematic. When you force a cycle without Meridian's timing, the ring cannot self-regulate. The coils drift. Somebody must sit in the coil room and hold them in phase by hand. Cycle by cycle, or the throat collapses and takes the arm of the station with it. He tapped a small red chamber on the diagram. This room, it is 9 meters from the coil housing. There is shielding, but the shielding was built for a gate that regulates itself. Dev was quiet for a second. How long can a person work in there? With rotation, 2 hours each. We have volunteers. Vesic's good eye moved to Miriam. It is the last cycle that is the difficulty. When the flare comes, the station will lose main power. The final cycle must be held on stored charge by hand until the last ship is through. He said the next part the way a man reads out a measurement. Whoever holds it cannot be on that ship. There will be no ship left to be on. Nobody said anything. I have already put my name down, Vesic said. I would appreciate it if nobody made a speech about it. Miriam went back to the Mudlark alone and sat in her chair in the dark for 4 minutes. Then she opened a channel. Naya, give me an all-bands broadcast, widest cast you can manage, human commercial frequencies, assembly emergency band, anything that carries. Naya hesitated. Captain, an open broadcast inside a closure order. The assembly's going to log every ship that answers. Anybody who turns around for us is going to lose their priority too. Their whole business. I know. Just so you know that I know, noted. Open it. The light went green. This is Captain Miriam Alcott of the salvage tug Mudlark, transmitting from inside the Accra inner marker, she said. I'm at Austral Station. There are 9,400 people here. They are not soldiers and they are not rated personnel and they did nothing wrong. They were left because a ledger somewhere decided the cost of moving them was more than the cost of not moving them. The star flares in 54 hours. We have a gate, and we can force it open. What we don't have is hulls. I want to be honest with everybody about what I'm asking, because I don't think you can ask somebody for this without saying the whole thing out loud. If you come, you will lose your salvage rights and your insurance standing and your assembly gate priority, and that means longer runs and worse contracts for the rest of your working life. There is no reward. There is no salvage. There's no legal cover, and there's nobody coming to back you up. There's just a station full of people, and there's time, and you have a ship. She looked at the light. My cargo bay holds 200, that's what I've got. If you've got more, bring it. She closed the channel. For a long time, nothing happened. Toby came up and stood beside her chair and didn't say anything, which was his way of being kind. Dev went down to start cutting the bunks out. Sam went back to the shop and started sorting plate steel. Because Sam had been doing this long enough to know that hope was not a plan but preparation looked exactly like it from the outside. 9 hours later, Nia sat straight up in her chair. Captain Go, or holler Kestrel Bay, out of Dunlin Reach. Captain Ochoa, Nia's voice cracked. She says she's dumped 40,000 tons of nickel into open space and she's coming in empty. 11 hours out, Miriam put her hand over her mouth. Captain, there's more. Nia was reading faster now and more were stacking up behind the first and she couldn't keep up with them. Tanker Fair Wind. Colony Transport Bellwether. She's a sleeper hull. She can take 900 if they stand. Scrapper 2 dogs. A liner, ma'am. The Marisol Dawn. She was 3 days out on a pleasure run and the passengers voted. Nia looked up with her eyes shining. They voted, Captain. The list kept coming for 2 more days. Down in the corridor of Austral Station, Cepha stood at a viewport and watched the running lights arrive out of the dark. One after another, ugly working ships with their holds hanging open, and she did not understand it at all. Why, she said when Miriam found her there. Please, I have to know why you're not paid. You are not ordered. You are punished for it. Every species in this galaxy has looked at us and done the same arithmetic, and every one of them got the same answer. Why did yours come out different? Miriam thought about it for a while. Because it deserved better than a slogan. I don't think ours came out different, she said finally. I think we just refused to do the sum. The Kestrel Bay came in first, and she came in wrong. She was an ore hauler, 400 meters of ugly industrial spine with 6 cargo spines hanging off her like ribs, and she was not built to dock with anything smaller than a planetary loading rig. Captain Ochoa brought her in anyway, at a speed that made Toby Grange put his hand over his eyes. She's going to hit the arm, Toby said. She isn't, said Miriam. She's coming in hot enough to. She isn't, watch. The Kestrel Bay rolled 90 degrees, fired her braking thrusters hard enough to shudder her whole frame, and stopped 400 meters off the station's number 3 arm with her spines open like a hand. Ochoa's voice came over the channel, a second later, dry as sand. Moodlark, this is Kestrel Bay. I can't dock. My clamps are bigger than your whole station arm. I'm going to hold position and you're going to walk them across. Miriam blinked, across open space. I've got 900 pressure suits in my emergency locker and 40 tether lines. It's a 200-meter walk. A pause. I know how that sounds, Captain. I've been thinking about it for 11 hours and it's still the best idea I've got. Vesic, standing behind them, made a low clicking sound that the translator didn't bother with. We have 4,000 suits, he said. It is a refinery. Everyone here has walked a hull. Even the children have walked a hull. His good eye moved to Miriam. Tell her yes. By the end of the first day, there were 19 ships holding station around Austral, and not one of them belonged to a navy. There was the Fairwind, a chemical tanker whose crew had spent 16 hours flushing her tanks with steam so they could put people inside them. There was the Bellwether, a colony transport running the long haul out to the rim. 900 cold berths, and a captain named Igeoma Blackwood who thawed every single one of her paying colonists and told them, politely, that they were going to be standing for a while. There was the Two Dogs, a scrapper so old her hull plating had 3 different registry numbers welded over each other, crewed by 4 brothers who did not give their family name to anybody and did not stop working for 30 straight hours. And there was the Marisol Dawn. She was a pleasure liner, white and gold, and absurd all observation decks and ballrooms. And when she slid into position beside the tanker, she looked like a swan that had wandered into a scrapyard. Her captain was a nervous, precise man named Renner, who had never in his life done anything more dangerous than a comet flyby. I have 1,100 passengers, he said on the open channel. I have been asked to inform you that they have removed the furniture from the Grand Salon, the theater, and both dining rooms and stacked it in the forward hold. They have also asked me to inform you that they took the vote 3 times because they wanted to be sure. He cleared his throat. I can take 2,000, Captain Alcott. They will be very uncomfortable. Sifa was standing at the viewport when he said it, and she had to put her hand flat against the glass. They are tourists, she said. Yeah, Miriam said. They are tourists. I heard you. The gate opened at 04 Uther station time on the second day. Dev Ramanathan and Vesic had spent 9 hours in the coil room getting the handshake spoof to hold, and when the ring finally lit, a slow, sullen violet crawling around the inside of the 100-meter circle, the whole arm of the station groaned like a ship in heavy weather. That's not a good sound, Dev said. It is a fine sound, said Vesic. It is the sound of a machine doing something it was told not to do. You should be used to it. He watched the phase read-out drift and corrected it with 2 fingers. 16 minutes per cycle, then 31 minutes to cool. Do not let anyone tell you they can make it faster. They will kill everyone. 16 on, 31 off. Dev did the math and didn't like it. That's roughly 1 cycle an hour and change. 51 hours left. Yes. So call it. 45 cycles. 44. The last one is different. Dev didn't ask. He'd heard they ran it like a rail terminal, because that was the only thing anyone could think to run it like. Toby Grange took the arm and turned into a man Miriam had never met before, a 19-year merchant officer standing on a loading gantry with a slate in one hand, shouting numbers, sorting 9,000 people into groups of 240, and sending them through in waves. Rhine kids ran the tether lines because they were fast and small and knew the hull better than anyone. Dr. Haddad set up a triage station and a machine shop and treated 800 people in 2 days for burns, radiation sickness, dehydration, and broken hands. Mostly broken hands because everyone had been working. Sam Byrne never went through the gate at all. He stayed on the arm with a torch and a hood and cut docking collars into ships that had never been designed to have them. 41 hours. And when Miriam finally ordered him to sleep, he took 2 hours in a supply closet and came back with a cup of coffee and no comment. And on the 4th wave, a mudlark deckhand named Priya Raval carried a Rin child across 200 meters of open vacuum on a tether line to the Kestrel Bay. The child's name was Numa. She was 6. She had never been outside the station in her life, and her suit was 3 sizes too big, and she would not stop talking the entire way over. A stream of chatter the translator rendered in a bright little voice inside Priya's helmet. Is that a star? Is that our star? Why is it that color? Is your ship the big one or the small one? Do you have a mother? Is your mother on the ship? And Priya answered every single question all 200 meters in a completely steady voice because the child could hear her breathing, and she was not going to let a 6-year-old hear an adult be afraid in open space. When they got inside, Priya sat down on the deck plating of the Kestrel Bay's spine and shook for 10 minutes. Then she got up and went back for the next one. By hour 40, they had moved 6,100 people. Miriam stood on the gantry with Toby and Sepha, and looked at the number on the slate and looked at the ships, and everybody there could do arithmetic. 3,300 left, Toby said. We've got 11 hours and everything out there is full. Bellwether's at capacity. Marisol Dawn is past capacity. Renner's got people sitting in the crew mess in shifts. Kestrel Bay is holding 1,100 in an ore spine with a heater and a prayer. Then we make room, Miriam said. There isn't any. There's always more, Toby. You know that. It's just that every meter of it costs somebody something. She keyed her comm. All ships. This is Mudlark. I need volume. Anything that isn't structural, cut it out and put it out the airlock. Bunks, lockers, partitions, galley equipment, water tanks past minimum, cargo, personal effects, all of it. I want the mass and I want the space. The channel was silent for 4 seconds. Then Ochoa said, Kestrel Bay acknowledges. I've got 3 cargo spines full of survey gear I was going to sell at Dunlin. It's out the door in 20 minutes. Then Blackwood on the Bellwether. We can pull the cold berths. 900 of them. It'll take 4 hours and will never be a colony ship again, but it's 400 cubic meters. Then Renner on the liner, sounding like a man reading his own sentence. The Marisol Dawn has a swimming pool. Toby actually laughed. Drain it, Miriam said. They took 200 more people in the drained pool of a pleasure liner, standing shoulder to shoulder on the blue tile, looking up at a glass ceiling with a dying star on the other side of it. At hour 51, the star did something new. The whole station rang. Every light on the arm went orange at once, and Dev's voice came over the comm from the coil room, tight and fast. Precursor flare. That's the shoulder of it. That's not the main event. Captain, the buoy was wrong. I'm reading the class 9 inside of 4 hours, not 8. Miriam looked at the slate. 940 people left on Austral Station. 4 ships still holding. 3 cycles worth of gate, if the gate lasted. Vesic, she said. I heard him. The old engineer's voice was perfectly calm. Captain, you should come down to the coil room now. There is a conversation we have to have, and I would like to have it before there is no time left to be polite about it. The coil room was 9 meters square, and the walls were 3 feet of laminated lead and boron, and it was still the hottest place Miriam had ever stood in her life. Not hot in temperature, hot in the other way. The dosimeter on her collar had started ticking the moment she came through the hatch, and it did not stop. Vesic sat at a control board that looked older than she was, with both hands flat on a pair of brass phase wheels, making tiny corrections every few seconds. Dev stood behind him with a slate. 4 hours, Vesic said, without turning around. 3 cycles, maybe 4. If the ring holds temperature better than I expect, it will not. 940 people, Miriam said, 240 a cycle. Yes, it is very close. That is the entire problem with the number 940. He nudged the left wheel a quarter turn. Now, the last cycle. I know about the last cycle. You know a version of it I have had to revise. Vesic finally looked up. His good eye was bloodshot to the point of being pink. When the flare arrives, the station loses main power. The gate will run on the stored charge in the arm capacitors. That is enough for 1 cycle of 16 minutes, but the charge does not come off the bank smoothly. It sags. It surges. It will try to kill the ring twice a minute. So, somebody holds the phase. Somebody holds the phase, Vesic agreed. And somebody else stands at the charge board and feeds it by hand. 2 jobs. 2 pairs of hands. They cannot be the same pair. He shrugged, a small tired motion. I have been trying for 6 hours to build a way to do it with 1 person. There is not one. I'm sorry, I would have liked to keep this to myself. Nobody said anything for a moment. The dosimeter ticked. Then I'll take the board, Dev said. No, said Vesic. I've been in this room 9 hours today. I know that you know the board, yes. You are the only human alive who knows this board, which is exactly why you're going to walk through that ring in 50 minutes and go and be that somewhere else. Vesic's ears flattened. Do you understand what I'm telling you? There are 200 stations like this one. 200. Every one of them has a gate locked by a handshake that comes from Meridian. In 11 hours, you will be the only person outside the assembly who knows how to open one without asking permission. He turned back to his wheels. So you will get on a ship, and you will be extremely annoying about this for the rest of your life. That is your job. Dev stood there with his jaw working and no argument at all. Fine, Vesic said. Then I require 1 more person, and I require them in the next 40 minutes, and I would prefer not to have to give a speech about it. You've got one. Sam Byrne was standing in the hatchway with his hood pushed back and a torch bottle still slung across his shoulder. Nobody had heard him come down the arm. Nobody ever did. Absolutely not, Miriam said.
Wasn't asking you, Captain?
Sam, I know how a charge board works. He came in and set the bottle down against the wall. Careful, the way he set everything down. It's a dial and a lever and a needle you keep between two marks. I've been keeping needles between two marks since before you were born. Ask him. Vesic looked at Sam for a long moment. Show me your hands. Sam held them out. They were enormous and scarred, and the last two fingers of the left one had a tremor in them. Both of those go to the lever, Vesic said. They will. It is not a dignified job. You will be on your feet for 16 minutes reading a needle in a room that is killing you, and you will not be able to see the gate or the ships or anything at all. I've had worse Tuesdays. Vesic's ears came halfway up. Yes, he said. All right. Seifa arrived 4 minutes later at a run, and she was angrier than Miriam had ever seen her. No, she said. No, not a human. This is our station. This is our gate. We have 900 people on this arm, and I promise you that every one of them will stand at that board. I will bring you 80 volunteers in 10 minutes. Foreman. Vesic didn't raise his voice. Sit down. I will not. Seifa. He said her name, the way you say a name you have been saying for 30 years. You're going to be the one who lands 9,400 people somewhere with no papers and no standing and no world to go back to. That is a much longer job than mine, and you are going to want your hands. He turned the wheel a quarter. And it should be one of ours and one of theirs. It should be exactly that. Do you understand why? Seifa stood very still. Because otherwise, Vesic said, in 50 years the story is that the human saved us, and that is a story that has an owner and a debt at the end of it. I do not want that story, I want the other one. Seifa put her hand flat against the lead wall. Which one, she said. That two men held a door open, said Vesic. And nobody could remember afterward which of them was which. Miriam found Sam alone on the gantry 20 minutes later, and it was the only part of the whole thing she'd ever have trouble talking about afterward. He was sitting on a cargo pallet drinking coffee out of a dented steel cup, watching the last groups file toward the ring. Don't, he said before she could start. I haven't said anything. You've got the face on, he drank. Sit down or go away, Captain. You're blocking my view. She sat down. I've got no wife, Sam said after a while. No kids. My brother's been dead 9 years. I'm 61 and my hands are going, and I've spent 43 years cutting other people's ships apart for scrap. He turned the cup around. I'm not saying it was a bad life. It was a fine life. I'm saying it's a whole one. It's finished. There's not a piece of it sitting somewhere half done. Sam, that's the difference. See, he nodded down the gantry at the line. There's about 600 people in that queue whose life is half done. That's all it is. It's not brave. It's just, he made a small balancing motion with his hand. It's just the arithmetic coming out the right way for once. Miriam looked at her boots for a while. You told me they refused to do the sum, she said. Yeah, well. Sam finished the coffee. Everybody cheats a little. The second to last cycle went through at 8:08:19 station time. 240 people. And Numa was in it holding Priya Raval's hand, and she asked 11 questions on the way to the ring and got 11 answers. That left 401. That's 2 cycles, Toby said on the arm, and his voice had gone rough. Captain, we've got charge for 1. Then we're not doing 240, Miriam said. We're doing 401. The throat won't. The throat will take what we put in it. Vesic says the ring doesn't care about mass. It cares about phase. She keyed her comm. Kestrel Bay, Marisol Dawn, 2 dogs, Mudlark, stand by to receive 401, all at once, no sorting, no groups. They come through in one column, and you catch them however you catch them. Ochoa, understood. Renner, the pool is available. Toby stared at her. And us, the Mudlark crew, we go through with them. Miriam said, last column, back of it. Every one of us. Dev, Nia, Hadid, Priya, you, me. She swallowed. That's the order, Toby. It's not everybody. No, Miriam said. It's not at 931. The star's outer envelope let go. Nobody who was there ever described the flare the same way twice. The people in the drained pool of the Marisol Dawn said the glass ceiling went white, then black, then white again, and that the whole liner rang like somebody had hit a bell with a hammer. The brothers on the 2 dogs said their hull plating sang. Priya Raval, standing in an oar spine on the Kestrel Bay with a 6-year-old holding onto her leg, said it didn't look like anything at all, because they had already sealed the spine and there were no windows, and that was somehow worse. On Austral Station, main power died in 3 stages over about 11 seconds. The lights went first, then the air handlers, and the sudden silence was the loudest thing on the arm. Then the artificial gravity stuttered, came back at about half, and stayed there, so that 401 people found themselves half floating in an orange emergency glow with a 100-meter ring at the end of the gantry and one cycle of charge left in the world. "Charge board," Vesic shouted from the coil room. "Boards live," Sam Burns said. He was standing at a panel the size of a door with a lever in both hands and a needle the size of his forearm swinging in front of him. The needle had 2 red marks on it. The gap between them was about 4 centimeters wide. Behind him, through 3 feet of shielding, the ring began to crawl violet. 16 minutes, Vesic said. "Foreman, move them!" Cepha moved them. She stood at the mouth of the ring in a work harness with a handlight, and she did not stop shouting for 16 minutes. Not orders, names. She had been third-shift foreman on that station for 19 years, and she knew 90,400 names, and she used every one she could reach, calling people forward by name into a violet hole in space. Because a person will hesitate at a door, and a person will not hesitate when somebody who knows them says their name. Miriam stood on the other side of the gantry and did the same thing in a language nobody there spoke, and it worked anyway. Keep it moving. Don't look at it. Look at the back of the head in front of you and keep walking. Grandmother up. Up. Both hands. That's it. Bellwether is receiving. They've got a med team on the other side. They've got heaters. Cepha. There's a kid on the deck plating. I have him. At minute 4, the needle jumped. Sam saw it start to go and hauled the lever down with everything he had, and the arm of the station made a noise like a whale, and the ring flickered. 1 whole second of nothing, 100 meters of black, and then came back. Somewhere in the column, 11 people screamed. That was a sag. Vesic called, perfectly level. That was the first one. There will be others. Nobody is dying. Keep walking. Needles back between the marks, Sam said. His voice was tight. How many of those are we getting? 9, perhaps 11. That the truth? No, Vesic said. There were 19. By minute 9, 260 people were through, and Sam Burns' hands had begun to shake in a way that had nothing to do with age. The room had a smell in it now, sharp and metallic, like a coin held under the tongue. His dosimeter had stopped ticking a while back. It hadn't run out. It had just given up trying to be useful. "Talk to me," he said, "old man. Talk about something." "About what?" "Anything. Your machine? You love your machine. I've been listening to you. Love your machine for 2 days." Vesic was silent for a moment, both hands on the brass wheels, making corrections every 4 seconds. "It was built by a species called the Ossi," he said, 2,000 years ago. "It is a beautiful piece of engineering, and every single part of it is honest except one. Correction. The handshake. They did not have to put the handshake in. The ring does not need permission from anybody to open. They put it in so that a gate could be a favor instead of a road." "Yeah," Sam said through his teeth. We had that with water." "Then you understand." "I understand fine." At minute 13, Miriam ran out of people. She turned around, and the gantry behind her was empty, and there was nobody left on Austral Station except the Mudlark crew standing in a knot by the ring and 2 men in a room full of lead. "Columns clear," she said into the comm. Vesic. Sam. "Columns clear, 401. That's everybody." "Then get on the road, Captain," Sam said. Sam, now Miriam. She had never heard him use her first name. Not once in 6 years. Toby went through. Nia went through, crying so hard that Haddad had to guide her by the elbow. Priya was already gone, 2 cycles back with a child. Dev Ramanathan stopped at the mouth of the ring and looked back down the arm toward the coil room hatch and stood there for 3 full seconds. "Go," said Vesic over the comm, "and be annoying." Dev went. Miriam was last. She stopped where Cepha had stood and put her hand on the frame of the ring. "Thank you," she said. It was a stupid, small, useless thing to say, and she said it anyway. "You were blocking the door," said Sam Byrne. She went through. There is no record of the last 90 seconds. The station's logs ended with the power. What is known is only what the ring did. Watched from 4 ships holding station 200 meters off the arm. At minute 15 and 40 seconds, the violet went out. It came back. It went out again, longer, and Ochoa on the Kestrel Bay said later that everybody on her bridge stood up at the same time without deciding to. Then it came back a 3rd time, and it burned steady and bright and much too hot for 11 more seconds, and the throat stayed open with nothing left to send through it, held there by 2 men who could not see it, who had no way of knowing the last column was clear, and who kept it open anyway because neither of them was willing to be the one who let go first on the chance that somebody was still walking. Then the star hit, and the arm of Austral Station came apart, and there was nothing there at all. 4 ships and 9,401 people watched it from the far side of the gate, 11 light-years away, on a repeater feed that arrived long after it stopped mattering. Nobody cheered. Somebody, somewhere, in the Marisol Dawn's drained swimming pool started to sing, and stopped. Sifa stood on the deck of a colony transport she had never seen before, surrounded by her entire remaining species, and pressed her hand flat against a viewport, and said one sentence that a translator picked up, and that half the galaxy would be arguing about within a month. Write it down that they held the door. The Assembly did not hold a trial, because the Assembly did not consider it a trial. They called it a correction of record, and they scheduled it for 11 days after Accra, and they sent a formal notice to Earth explaining that attendance was not required, but that non-attendance would be entered as agreement. Ambassador Tomas Ferreira went. He was 58 years old, born in Recife, and he had spent 22 years learning how to be polite to people who thought he came from a species of clever animals. He had a good suit, a bad back, and a reputation among the other ambassadors as a man who never raised his voice. Meridian Station was the size of a small moon. The Hall of Record at its center was a bowl half a kilometer across with tiered seating for 406 member species, and it had been designed, as far as Ferreira could ever tell, for one purpose: to make whoever stood at the bottom of it feel like a rounding error. His aide, a young woman named Gwen Aturu, walked down with him and stopped at the edge. "Sir," she said quietly, "whatever they say, please remember there are cameras on this from 600 worlds." "I'm counting on it," said Ferreira. First, Arbiter Kesh Tal spoke from the high seat. The Osai were tall 9 feet, sometimes 10, with segmented chitin, the color of old ivory, and 4 arms that folded flat against the body. When at rest, Kesh Tal's were folded. Their voice came out through a row of vents along the throat, and the translator rendered it as something dry and unhurried, like wind moving through a pipe organ that had not been played in a long time. "Ambassador Ferreira, this is a correction of record, not a proceeding. You are not accused. You are being informed of a finding." "I understand, First Arbiter. On the 11th of Sethri, 41 vessels of human registry entered the Accra system in violation of Closure Order 44. They forced an assembly transit gate without handshake authority. They removed 9,401 unrated persons from a scheduled loss." A pause. "In the course of this action, 31 human lives were expended. 9 vessels were destroyed or written off. Approximately 400 million credits of cargo was voluntarily jettisoned into open space. That's all correct. The finding of this assembly is that the action constituted a reckless expenditure of rated lives." Ferreira let a moment go by. "Say the last part again, First Arbiter, slowly, for the record." "Reckless expenditure of rated lives," said Kesh Tal. 31 certified crew. 9 hulls against a population already entered as loss." "Already entered," said Ferreira. "Yes. You wrote them down as dead 8 days before they were dead. We wrote them down as loss." Kesh Tal's second pair of arms unfolded slightly. "Ambassador, I am aware that your species finds this distasteful. I'm going to explain it once properly, because I do not think anyone has ever explained it to you properly, and I have grown tired of being called a monster by people who have not read the arithmetic. Please." Under Ledger Envoy Rule rose from the tier below, a smaller Osai, gray-shelled, holding a slate. "The ledger is 11,400 years old," Rule said. "It began after the second contraction, when 400 species tried to rescue each other simultaneously through a network of gates that could not carry the traffic. 11 billion died, not in the disaster. In the rescue, I've read the contraction histories. Then you know the principle. A rescue has a cost. The cost is measured in hulls, crew, transit capacity, and the delay imposed on every other movement in the network. When that cost exceeds the value of the population recovered, the rescue is not mercy. It is a second disaster laid on top of the first." Rule tapped the slate. "So we measure. Every person carries a rating. It is not a judgment of their soul, Ambassador, whatever your broadcasts have been saying. It is a measure of what recovering them costs and what recovering them returns. When the ratio inverts, we close the system and we take who we can, and we do it in an orderly fashion. And no one has to decide anything in a panic while 11 billion people die, and Austral inverted comprehensively. Refinery labor, elderly dependents, 240 per gate cycle against a stellar event with an 8-hour confidence interval." Rule set the slate down. "The ledger gave the correct answer. We took 2,600. It was the best available outcome." "You got 9,401, Ferreira said. The hall went quiet. "Sorry, I want to be careful here, because I'm not a mathematician and you people are. So let me just put the numbers next to each other. Ferreira held up one hand. Your correct answer got 2,600 out. He held up the other. Our reckless expenditure got 9,401 out. Same station, same star, same 8-hour confidence interval. You got wrong by 4 hours. With losses, your ledger did not permit, said Keshtal. With losses our people volunteered for. Ferreira turned in a slow circle so that the tears could all see his face. That's the part I don't think your ledger has a column for, first arbiter. And I've looked. I've had people go through it. There's a column for a life. There's a column for a hull. There's no column anywhere in 11,000 years of your arithmetic for a man deciding for himself. Sentiment is not. It's not sentiment, it's supply. Ferreira's voice finally came up, and it startled the hall, because he had never done it before. Your whole doctrine assumes that rescue capacity is fixed. It isn't, it's elastic. Captain Ochoa dumped 40,000 tons of nickel and made 3 cargo spines into passenger space in 20 minutes. That capacity did not exist in your model, and it did not exist in the universe until she decided it did. 1,100 tourists on a pleasure liner voted to drain a swimming pool and stand for 11 light years. A colony transport tore out 900 cold berths and stopped being a colony transport forever. None of that is in the ledger. You have been running an 11,000-year-old spreadsheet that cannot see the single largest variable in the equation, which is what people will actually do when you ask them out loud. Because it cannot be relied upon, said Keshtal. No, Ferreira agreed. It can't. That's the whole point of it, Envy Rule said quietly. The two who remained at the gate. One was yours, one was theirs. Yes. Why? You'd have to ask them, said Ferreira. You can't. That's rather the situation. Keshtal's 4 arms folded flat. The assembly finds that human registry cannot be trusted to observe closure discipline. The first arbiter said, effective immediately, all vessels of human registry are stripped of gate priority throughout assembly space. Human transit is permitted only in the residual tier. Last cycle. Lowest handshake. No scheduling guarantee. Assembly technical exchange with Earth is suspended. Assembly insurance underwriting for human hulls is withdrawn. The 9,401 recovered persons are entered as an unrated population under human custody, and human custody alone. They are your cost now, Ambassador. Every one of them. Ferreira nodded slowly. He'd expected all of it. Losing gate priority meant Earth's ships would sit at the back of every queue in the galaxy. 4 days, 6 days, 11 days, watching everyone else go first. It meant every price on Earth going up. It meant a generation of hard, grinding, ordinary hardship for people who'd had nothing to do with any of it. He'd expected that too. Is there a response? Said Keshtal. One thing. Ferreira picked up his case. You put a lock in the gates. You didn't have to. The ring doesn't need permission from anybody to open. One of our engineers had that explained to him by a RIN gate technician about 40 minutes before the man died. He looked up at the high seat. You built roads, and then you made them favors. That's not order. First arbiter. That's just a very old business. He walked out. Behind him, in the tier reserved for minor commercial species, a Dovani trade captain named Olin Murr sat looking at her hands for a long time and did not vote. The first winter was bad. Losing gate priority sounded like a paperwork problem right up until people understood what it meant. Every human ship in the galaxy now went last. A run from Earth to Dunlin Reach that used to take 9 days took 26 because the fair wind and everything like her sat in a holding pattern at the throat of every gate watching 405 other species cycle through ahead of them. Longer runs meant fewer runs meant less of everything. Medical isotopes went first. Then the rare metals that half of Earth's electronics were built out of. Then by the 4th month, the ordinary things, coffee, citrus, replacement parts for water plants in cities that had been buying replacement parts for 11 years instead of building factories. Prices went up 40% in Lagos and Manila and Bogota and stayed there. A power authority in southern Spain went to rolling blackouts. In February, there were riots in 3 cities, and they were not about aliens at all. They were about the price of bread, which is what riots have always been about. Chancellor Amara Boyd did not go on television and tell people it was worth it. She had been advised to, she refused. You don't tell a man whose kid is cold that his sacrifice has meaning, she told her cabinet. He didn't sacrifice. We spent his warmth. Say that. So she said that instead, and it did not help very much. But people remembered later that she'd said it. The funerals ran through most of March because 31 people had died and the bodies of 11 of them were never coming back. Sam Burns was in a union hall in Bristol on a Thursday morning. And it should have been 9 people and a priest because he had no wife and no children, and his brother had been dead 9 years. 4,000 people came. They came because the Mudlark's crew had put out a notice on the shipfitters' board, and the shipfitters had told the dock workers, and by the day of it, there were welders standing in the rain outside the hall from 6 different countries. Somebody had brought his tools. They put them on the table at the front where a photograph normally went. A hood, a striker, a pair of gloves worn through at the last 2 fingers of the left hand. Miriam Alcott spoke for 4 minutes and got through it. Mostly, he wasn't brave, she said. He told me that himself on the gantry, about half an hour before. He said his life was a whole one, and the people in the queue had half-done ones, and it was just the arithmetic coming out the right way for once. She looked at the gloves. I've thought about that every day since, and I've decided he was wrong. I've decided that's what brave actually is. It's not a feeling. It's a man sitting on a pallet with a cup of coffee doing sums about himself and being honest at the end of them. At the back of the hall, 90 Rhine stood in silence in borrowed coats, because Seifa had asked and every one of them had come. There was no funeral for Vesic. The Rhine did not do funerals. They did a thing called a redding, where the dead person's work was gone through by whoever inherited it. Dev Ramanathan spent 11 days in a room in Geneva, going through 40 years of a gate engineer's notes with 3 RIN technicians, and at the end of it he came out looking like a man who had been handed something enormous and did not yet know what it was. Gerald Pike started with a broadcast in April, and by June he had 9 million listeners. He was 52. He had been a moderately successful sports commentator, and he had discovered that being angry was a much better business than being interesting. I want to be clear that I don't blame them, he said, every episode, always in the first 2 minutes. I blame us. Nobody asked me. Did anybody ask you? 41 captains made a decision in a system nobody's ever heard of, and now my mother pays 6 times for her heart medication. That's not compassion. That's 41 people spending money that wasn't theirs. He called it the Earth Ledger, which was clever, and he knew it was clever, and he used it constantly. In September, 11,000 people filled a square in Munich holding signs that said, "We didn't vote for this." It was a fair point, and it was honestly made, and Chancellor Boyd went out and stood in front of them for 2 hours and answered questions, and it did not change a single mind, and she went anyway. The thing that nobody had planned for was what it did to the RIN. Seifa understood the numbers better than most humans did, because she had spent 19 years running a refinery on a budget. She read the trade figures every morning. She watched the price of a human loaf of bread go up, and she sat with it. We are the cost, she said. We are the line item. Every person in this city who pays double for their power is paying for us, and they know it, and they are polite about it, which is worse. That's a rotten way to think, said Hank Mercer. Hank was 71, a retired dock worker from Sunderland with 2 bad knees, and he had volunteered for the resettlement program, mostly because he was bored. He had been assigned to Seifa as a language partner. 8 months in, they had lunch 3 times a week and argued constantly. It is the accurate way to think. It's accurate and it's rotten. Those aren't opposites. Hank stirred his tea. You want to hear something? My granddad's whole town was built by people who came off boats and got called a cost for 30 years, every single one of them. Then they built the yards and everybody forgot they'd ever said it. He pointed the spoon at her. The cost thing has a shelf life, Seifa. It always does. Only takes 1 generation. We do not have a generation. We have 8 months and a bad winter. Then stop waiting for people to change their minds and give them a reason to. Seifa put down her cup. Say that again, she said. That evening she called every RIN who had ever held a technical certificate, 1,140 of them, refinery engineers, coil technicians, phase alignment specialists, people who had spent their whole working lives maintaining assembly infrastructure they were never permitted to own. She found Dev Ramanathan in the room in Geneva with Vesic's notes. Engineer, she said. You have been reading for 11 days. I want you to tell me honestly. How much of it do you understand? Dev looked at the stacks around him. Maybe a fifth, he said. Then you will need help, said Seifa. Because we are going to build a gate. The thing about a transit gate, it turned out, was that almost nobody on Earth had ever seen the inside of one. Humanity had been using gates for 91 years. They had never built one. They had never been permitted to build one. The assembly leased gate accessed the way a landlord leases a doorway, and for 91 years that had seemed like an enormous privilege, because the alternative was 11 months in a sublight hull eating recycled protein. They sold us the tolls, Seifa said on the first day, standing in front of 200 people in a hangar at the Bremerhaven yards. You have been paying tolls for 91 years on a road you could have built in 11. 11? What? Somebody called from the back. Years. That's not 11, love. That's a career. Then start, said Sefa. B and Kamelu, who ran the Bremerhaven yards and had been building orbital structures for 26 years, put her hand up. Right, she said, before anybody gets excited. What do you actually need? A ring, 2,000 tons of superconductor, a phase board, and an answer to the handshake. Sefa held up 4 thick fingers, then folded the last one down. You have the ring? You have better superconductor than the assembly does, because you have been buying the cheap grade for 91 years and building around it, which has made your metallurgists very good and very angry. The phase board we can teach. The handshake is the problem. How much of a problem? Dev Ramanathan answered that one. He had aged about 4 years and 8 months. The handshake isn't a lock, he said. That's what took me 11 days to understand, and it's the whole thing. So listen, it's a conversation. Every gate in assembly space asks Meridian for a slot in the traffic pattern, and Meridian says yes and gives it a timing signature, and the gate uses that signature to hold phase. You can spoof a yes, Vesic did. We did it at Austrel. But you're spoofing a timing signal you didn't generate, so you have to hold the coils by hand and it eats people. And Vesic spent 40 years asking why the gate has to ask anybody. Dev put a slate on the table. The answer is, it doesn't. It has to ask something. It needs a stable external clock. The assembly made itself the clock 11,000 years ago and then wrote 11,000 years of law about it. He tapped the slate. But a pulsar is a clock. There are 400 of them in range. They're free and they're accurate to 11 decimal places and nobody owns them. The hangar was very quiet. Say that again, said B and Kamelu. Vesic's notes have 3 years of pulsar phase modeling in them. He never built anything. He was a refinery tech on a station that would have executed him for trying. Dev's voice did something complicated, but he did the math. He did all of it. He just never had a species stupid enough to fund it. Bia started laughing and had to sit down on a crate. The first ring took 19 months. It was built at Lagrange Point 4 out of 2,000 tons of the cheap-grade superconductor that Earth metallurgists had spent 91 years learning to make sing. And it was ugly. And it was welded rather than fused because welding was what Bremerhaven knew how to do. RIN phase technicians trained 400 human apprentices. Human structural engineers redesigned a coil housing the assembly had not changed in 2,000 years and made it 14% lighter, mostly by accident, because nobody had told them it couldn't be done. They called the ring the burn. Nobody voted on it. It just got called that, and then it was too late. While it was going up, other things were happening on the ground. Marisol Vega taught primary year 3 in a school outside Valparaiso, and by the second year, her classroom had 9 Rhine children in it out of 31. She had been terrified about it for exactly 4 days. There's 7, she told a reporter who came to do a worried piece about integration. Do you know what a 7-year-old thinks is interesting about a Rhine, the second eyelid? That's it. That's the entire list. They asked about it for 1 week and then it was boring, and now they argue about football. Numa was 7.5. She could read Spanish better than she could read Rhine, which caused a small quiet grief in her mother that she was careful never to show. She had at last count. 104 questions saved up for the next time Priya Raval came to visit, and Priya always came, and always answered all of them. And the ledger, the small human one, the one on the news every night, began to turn. It turned slowly, and it turned for unglamorous reasons. RIN refinery technique cut the energy cost of Earth's smelting by 1/3 in the first year, because the RIN had spent 400 years refining metal in orbit around a star that kept trying to kill them and had gotten very good at doing it cheaply. 2 RIN metallurgists and a woman from Kaduna solved a superconductor tolerance problem that had been sitting in a drawer since the 60s. The energy price came down 11%, then 19%. Gerald Pike's audience went from 9 million to 4 million to something he stopped announcing. He never apologized. Men like that rarely do. But in the 4th year, he did a broadcast where he said, almost in passing, that his mother's medication was cheaper than it had been before Accra, and that he supposed you had to say so if it was true. And then he changed the subject fast and talked about football for 40 minutes. The burn fired for the first time on a Tuesday in October at 0400 UTC, because that was when the traffic modeling said the pulsar geometry was best and nobody was willing to wait for a more photogenic hour. 4,000 people watched from the yard platforms. Sefa stood at the front with B and Kamelu on one side and Dev on the other. Miriam Alcott had been flown in and did not want to be at the front, so she stood 4 rows back with the Mudlark crew. The ring lit violet. It held for 16 minutes, and then 30, and then 2 hours, drawing its timing from a dead star 1,100 light-years away that had never asked anybody for anything. And it did not sag once. and nobody had to stand in a room full of lead. Biakemalu wiped her face with the back of her wrist and said, "Right. What's it cost to build the second one?" "About a fifth of that," said Dev. "The first one's always stupid." "Then we'll do 60, said Sefa. The burn had been open for 11 days when the first thing came through it that nobody had sent. It was a distress loop. It had been bouncing around the residual tier of the assembly network for 6 days, downgraded and deprioritized, and finally dumped onto an open band where anyone could hear it, which meant nobody had. Nia Kowalski was 31 now and worked traffic control at the burn, and she heard it at 3000 on a Sunday, and she sat very still for about 4 seconds. Then she called Miriam Alcott at home. "Captain," she said, "it's happening again." Torvin Deep was a mining habitat, deep crust, 41,000 people, a species called the Halix. Their sun was fine. Their problem was that the seam had run out, and the consortium that owned the habitat had filed for closure, and the assembly had granted it, and the ledger had rated 41,000 miners at a number that fit on one line, closure order 61, 22 days. And this time, Keshtal had sent ships. The assembly did not call it a blockade. They called it a closure enforcement screen, and it consisted of 60 warships strung across the 4 approach vectors to Torvin Deep in a formation that had not been meaningfully challenged in 2,000 years. Commodore Hannah Ito looked at the tactical plot and said, "The only honest thing available, we lose." She was 49, born in Kagoshima, and she had spent her whole career commanding a navy that everyone including her understood was mostly ceremonial. She had 11 Earth defense vessels behind them, strung back along the approach. She had 94 civilian hulls that had come the way civilian hulls had come to Accra, because somebody put out a call on an open band. "We lose in what sense?" said Chancellor Boyd from a screen with a 4-second delay. "Every sense, ma'am. 60 ships of the line against 11. They have 2,000 years of doctrine and we have 91. If it turns into a shooting engagement, we are destroyed inside 40 minutes, and Torvin Deep dies anyway." Ito rubbed her eyes. "Which is why I'm not going to give them a shooting engagement." "Explain." "They came here to stop a rescue. That's the mission they've been handed. Keshtal thinks he's blockading a fleet." Ito brought up the second plot. "He isn't. He's blockading 41,000 miners worth of transport hulls with the guns stripped out, escorted by warships under orders not to fire under any circumstances, moving at a constant vector, broadcasting our manifest in the clear on every band in the sector." There was a long pause on the delay. "You're going to make them shoot unarmed ships on camera," said Boyd. "I'm going to make them decide to," said Ito in front of 405 species. "That's a different thing, and it takes about 90 seconds. And 90 seconds is a very long time when you've been told all your life that you're the reasonable one." The Halix had built 2 gate rings themselves in the 11 days since Cepha's engineers had reached them. They were terrible rings. They were welded out of habitat structural steel by people who had learned phase alignment from a Rhine technician over a laggy relay. And Dev Ramanathan looked at the specifications and said a word his mother would not have liked. "They'll hold for maybe 40 cycles," he said. "Then they'll tear themselves apart." "How many people is 40 cycles?" said Cepha. "With hulls that size, 41,000. Dev laughed, slightly wildly. "Exactly. It's exactly enough." "That's not engineering. That's a coin landing on its edge." "Then we go now while it is still standing up." The transport column crossed the outer marker at 0600 on the 9th day, 94 hulls, ore haulers, tankers, colony transports, a converted liner, 4 ships from the Rhine Merchant Registry that had not existed 3 years earlier, and one very old salvage tug called the Mudlark running at the head of the column with Miriam Alcott in the chair, because she had refused every single suggestion that she stay home. They were unarmed. Every one of them broadcast that fact, continuously, along with a passenger manifest, a medical inventory, and a plain language statement of intent in 11 languages on an open band. Keshtal's voice reached them 9 minutes later, human column. "You are entering an enforcement screen under closure order 61. Alter your vector, you will not be warned twice." Ito answered on the same open band so that everybody in the sector heard both halves. "First Arbiter. This is Commodore Hannah Ito, Earth Defense. My column is 94 unarmed transport hulls carrying medical staff and empty passenger volume. My escorts have their weapons cold and locked, and I will transmit the lock codes to you if you want to verify it. We are not going to fire on you. We are not able to fire on you." A pause. "We're going to keep flying, sir. That's all we're going to do. You are attempting to make this a moral display." "Yes, sir," said Ito. "That's exactly what I'm doing. I'd rather have a better plan." "I don't." The screen opened fire at 0641. They fired warning shots first, 3 ranging bursts across the column's bow, which was doctrine and which the ledger permitted. The column did not alter vector. At Surf 644, a Krivik heavy cruiser put a full spread into the fair wind, which was a chemical tanker, with 1,100 empty cubic meters and 41 people aboard, and holed her through the spine. She did not stop. She could not stop. Her attitude control was gone. She kept going on her last vector, venting, straight through the screen, and everybody on every band listened to her captain reading out casualty numbers in a completely level voice because he did not know what else to do with the last 4 minutes he had. The Mudlark went to her. So did 2 Rin merchant hulls. They matched her tumble and took her people off through a hard-docked collar in 19 minutes while the screen kept firing over them. And that was the moment. It was not a speech and it was not a battle. And afterward the historians would spend 40 years arguing about who moved first. And the answer was almost certainly a Dovani trade captain named Olin Mayer, who had sat in the commercial tier at Ferreira's correction of record 3 years earlier and not voted. Her ship was the second argument, and she was screen element 11, and she was ordered to fire on the transport Bellwether. She did not fire. Instead, she moved her ship 400 meters and put it between the Bellwether and a Krivik gun line, and opened a channel to the entire screen, and said one sentence: "I'm not shooting at a hospital ship in front of my grandchildren." 11 minutes later, 9 ships of the screen had done the same thing. Then 19. Then the Halix mining tenders came up from the habitat, unarmed, 40 of them, and simply flew into the gaps, and a formation 2,000 years old stopped being a formation and became a large number of individual captains, each making an individual decision in front of 405 species with the cameras running. At 8:12, Keshtal ordered the screen to withdraw. Not because the assembly had been defeated. It had not been 60 warships. Could have killed every human and Rin and Halix hull in that system inside an hour, and the first arbiter knew it, and so did Ito. He withdrew because he had watched in 91 minutes an 11,000-year-old instrument discover that it could not be relied upon. Not the fleet. The doctrine. The ledger had never had a column for a Dovani captain deciding for herself, and now 405 species had watched one do it live. 41,000 Halix went through 2 badly welded rings over the following 2 days. Both rings failed inside a week. Neither failed early. 11 human ships were lost. 206 people died, and the Fair Wind's captain was one of them. Miriam Alcott sat on the bridge of the Mudlark afterward with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and Toby Grange standing beside her chair, not saying anything, which was still his way of being kind. "We're going to have to do this again," she said. "Yeah," said Toby, "somewhere else." "Next year? Every year?" "Yeah." Miriam looked at the coffee. "Then we shouldn't keep doing it by accident," she said. They did not build an alliance because Cepha refused to let them. That surprised almost everybody. There were 11 months of meetings in the 4th year, and there were 400 people in those meetings who wanted a parliament and a charter and a flag, and every one of them was politely and immovably talked out of it by a Rin refinery foreman with a burn scar on the left side of her face. "You want to build a second assembly," she said, in a hall in Nairobi, to 900 delegates from 26 species. "You want a body that decides who is worth going to get, and you will be better than them for 100 years, and then you will be tired, and then somebody will suggest a rating system because somebody always does, and it will be reasonable, and it will be correct, and it will be the ledger with different handwriting. Then what do we build?" somebody asked. "A dispatch office," said Cepha. They called it the Open Gate Accord, and it was 4 pages long, and 3 of the 4 pages were technical annexes about pulsar phase timing. The whole of the operative text was this: any signatory gate would open on request for any hull answering a distress call, without handshake, without permission, without asking who was on board. Signatories agreed to publish their gate designs. Signatories agreed that no rating, rank, certification, contribution, or economic viability of any person would ever be entered as a condition of transit. There was no army. There was no council. There was no seat anybody could be denied. What there was the Lantern Fleet. And it was not a fleet either, which was the joke everybody eventually stopped explaining to newcomers. It was a frequency any ship that wanted to could carry a lantern transponder and monitor the open distress band, and that was the entire membership requirement. By the 6th year, there were 11,000 of them: ore haulers, tankers, medical frigates, scrappers, 2 pleasure liners, a mail packet run by a retired Dovani trade captain named Olin Murr, and 1 very old salvage tug that had been rebuilt 3 times and was by then mostly not the original ship at all. When a call came in, whoever was closest went. Nobody assigned anybody. Nobody was paid. It worked far better than it had any right to, and it worked for exactly the reason Keshtal's ledger had always said it wouldn't, because nobody had to decide whether it was worth it. They only had to decide whether they were closest. The assembly never recognized the accord. It never signed anything, never issued a statement, never withdrew closure order 44 or 61. But in the 7th year, Underledger Envy Rule published a technical revision to the loss rating framework that ran to 1,100 pages and, buried on page 406, introduced a new variable. It was designated a discretionary capacity coefficient. It was defined as the difference between rescue capacity as modeled and rescue capacity as actually observed in the field. In every working document since, everyone in the Assembly's actuarial service has called it the human factor, and nobody has ever put that phrase in writing. Thomas Ferreira, 71 and long retired, met Kesh Tal once more at a trade summit on a neutral station, and they stood at a viewport together for 11 minutes without either of them saying anything. "You did not win," the first arbiter said eventually. "No," Ferreira agreed. "I noticed. The ledger is still the law in 400 systems. It will be the law in 400 systems when you're dead, probably." Kesh Tal's forearms folded flat. "Then what do you imagine you accomplished, Ambassador?" Ferreira thought about it for a while because it deserved better than a slogan, and he had learned that from a salvage captain. "I think we made it embarrassing," he said. Kesh Tal did not answer that, but 11 days later the Assembly quietly opened its gate specifications to the commercial tier for the first time in 2,000 years, and gave no reason for it, and has never given one since. Numa was 19 when she qualified. She had grown up outside Valparaiso arguing about football, and she had gone to the Bremerhaven yards at 16 because a woman named B.A. and Camelu ran an apprenticeship there and did not care in the slightest what shape anybody's eyelids were. She was a phase technician. She was by all accounts better than her mother had ever been, which Cepha said constantly and loudly and with enormous satisfaction. Her first posting was to a lantern hull called the Vesic. Priya Raval was her captain, which was not a coincidence, and which neither of them ever pretended was one. On her 4th month aboard, a call came in from a place none of them had heard of, a research station in a system with a designation instead of a name. 600 people, atmosphere plant failing, and the local assembly relay had already logged them as a scheduled loss. Numa was 19 years old and standing at a phase board that a dead man had designed on a ship named after him, and she heard the captain open a channel and say the 4 words that the Lantern Fleet had never formally adopted and had never needed to because everybody said them anyway. "This is the Vesic, we're coming," and that, in the end, was the whole of it. Humanity never gave the galaxy a technology it did not already have. The rings were Ossi, the math was Rhine, the metallurgy was borrowed and improved, and half of it was borrowed back again. There is nothing in the Accord that 100 species could not have written at any point in 11,000 years, and several of them very nearly did. What humanity contributed was smaller than that and harder to file, and the actuarial service is still trying to find a column for it. It was a sentence. Somebody has to be the first one to say we're coming out loud, on an open band where everyone can hear it, and where it cannot be taken back, before the sum has been done, before the cost is known, before anybody has worked out whether it makes sense. The ledger could never model that, because it is not a quantity. It is a decision, and it has to be made new every single time, by somebody standing at a board with a needle in front of them, alone in the 4 seconds before they answer. The galaxy had spent 11,000 years getting the arithmetic right. Humanity just refused to do the sum.